for everybody's sake, you can't see Sharron. You maybe can't see everybody, but she is here with us. She's just behind the screen on her phone, suffering from a power outage and the block that their company is located on. So anyway, Sharron, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sorry I couldn't be there more virtual. Just about 20 minutes ago, our entire block has a power outage and apparently won't be back on till 7 p.m. So I'm calling from my phone, so hopefully you can hear me all okay. I just wanted to welcome everybody to this edition of Innovators Chat, Navigating Essential Critical Business Travel under the Guidelines of U.S. and Canada Immigration. I'm Sharron Gilbert, President and CEO of Septimatech Group Inc. I am a member of the KW chapter and excited about my new appointment to the chair of Innovators Alliance. A high bar is set by our past chair, PJ Ferguson, that I am committed to continue to forge the path of IA as an indispensable resource. Today's chat is relevant, timely, and informational, as I'm told by Peggy that several of our same questions have come up in various IA chapter meetings regarding navigating business travel during a pandemic. Peggy reached out to me to see how we were handling the situation, since we've been able to perform essential critical travel to over 30 U.S. customer sites in 13 different states since March. This brings me to our guest presenters and how Innovators Alliance is an indispensable resource for us members. When COVID-19 turned everyone's world upside down, our company started to run into border challenges when attempting to get essential critical workers into the U.S. to support our customers and their production demands. Peggy listened in on a chapter meeting and immediately connected me to Bruce Whitehouse from the Halton chapter. Bruce was a great resource. He then introduced me to Lizabeth Martin, a U.S. immigration lawyer who is presenting today. Liz made a huge impact by getting our service technicians and engineering employees into the U.S. seamlessly. Then we started to run into issues when our essential employees returned to Canada with the imposed Quarantine Act. Liz then connected me with Jamie Fiegel, a Canadian immigration lawyer who is also presenting today. Jamie, too, made a positive impact on our business, which led to our travel employees being exempt from the Quarantine Act. Peggy and I spoke about how we could help our members at large. Since Innovator Alliance members have a broad and diverse product and service offering specific to their customer needs, we are delighted that both Liz and Jamie will share their expertise by leading today's chat. At any time you have a question, please type your question in the chat box located on the panel bar. And since we have a hard stop at 5:30, every attempt will be made to answer as many questions as possible. We will also give you their contact information so that you can connect directly with Liz and Jamie to help you with any specific business travel needs. Liz and Jamie, thank you so much for being here. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sharron. That was awesome. I'm going to share the screen with the PowerPoint presentation now before we start. Is that okay? Let me see if I can make that happen here. And see if I can do it that way.
Yay.
Did it work?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. All right. Hopefully I can maneuver through, and then Liz, as we go back and forth, I'll just keep going to move to the next slide. If you need me to, just prompt me to move to the next slide. My name's Jamie Fiegel. I am a licensed RCIC in Canada and a U.S. immigration attorney. I've been practicing U.S. and Canadian immigration for about 16 years. I'm married to a Canadian citizen, but I was born in the U.S. We both have dual citizenships, and our kids all have dual citizenships, and that's really what brought me into the world of immigration law through that background. I live in Fort Erie, Ontario, but I work in Buffalo, New York. So the challenges that we'll be talking about today and the experiences, I not only help clients with them, but I'm living them. So it makes it a little bit easier to have a beat on what's going on and what's being asked and what the changes are when I'm physically going through those challenges myself. That somebody's, does everybody hear that, or is that just me?
I hear something.
Now, could
Okay.
everybody that's not speaking mute themselves would be great. Not you two, Liz and Jamie, but everybody else.
I don't think it was on my end. All right. So Liz, I'll hand over to you to have a bio before we start.
Sure. Okay. My name's Liz Martin. I'm a partner with Hodgson Russ in Buffalo. I am only a U.S. citizen. I practice U.S. immigration law in Buffalo, right on the border. I have been practicing immigration law for 20 years. Before that, I was a litigator, which I was a litigator for about 8 years, and I left litigation because I wanted a more normal schedule to be an immigration lawyer, but it hasn't quite turned out that way. But being a litigator has actually made me a better immigration lawyer because I really see things from a different perspective. I don't want to say a more adversarial perspective or a more aggressive perspective, but it does help. The big difference between being a litigator and being an immigration attorney is we have an extremely strong immigration bar cross-border, which is how I'm able to work with Jamie. And Jamie and I work with all sorts of immigration practitioners in the area. Everybody's on the same side. Everybody helps each other. Everybody shares, whatever information they can get, because so much of immigration law is not written anywhere or published anywhere. A lot of it is word of mouth, especially when there are all kinds of, changes going on, especially what's going on now. And therefore we're able to kind of find out, what's happening at what court and who's doing what. So I'm very happy to be doing this, and that's all I've got.
All right. So we'll have you start out with the U.S. border restrictions, Liz.
Okay. Yeah. This talk is going to be primarily based on, the U.S.-Canada border restrictions. We're not going to really get into any of the other international restrictions, but I am going to talk about them a little bit. First of all, U.S. border restrictions. Right now, between Canada and the U.S., if you want to enter the U.S., all non-essential travel is prohibited. That means, as we say in the slide, no tourism, no recreation, no visiting your vacation house, no going to Disney World, and nothing like that. In terms of what is considered essential, you can move on to the next slide, because that's everyone wants to know is what is essential. It basically, for people who are running businesses in Canada, it means if you're traveling to work in the U.S. There are a lot of other instances that fall within essential travel, as we have on our slide. We have citizens and lawful permanent residents of the U.S. Obviously, if you're a U.S. citizen or you have dual citizenship, you can enter the U.S. at any time. They can't stop you. If you're traveling for medical purposes, you can come in. If you are traveling to attend educational institutions, there has been a lot going on about that right now with respect to F1 students, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Emergency public health purposes, lawful cross-border activity, it's like truck drivers, individuals engaged in official government, diplomatic travel, military operations. But today I just wanted to focus on people who are traveling for work purposes. Now, technically, travel for work purposes can mean Canadians or, frankly, other foreign nationals who are traveling from Canada who have work permits to work in the U.S. That's an easy one. You have a work permit, you're allowed to work in the U.S. for a U.S. company or for the benefit of your Canadian company. The other travel for work purposes is coming in as a business visitor. Now, business visitor there are many things that can qualify you as a business visitor and many things that can disqualify you. But when you're coming in as a business visitor, you don't have a work permit. You're just coming in for, it could be many different reasons. I mean, Canadian businesses can be, marketing their products in the U.S., attending a trade show, taking orders for a product that's manufactured in Canada, conducting after-sales service that's covered under a warranty for a previous sale. The coming in as a business visitor is something that's been a little bit tricky since the travel restrictions were put into place. There are some ports of entry that don't consider business visitor travel, I wouldn't say legitimate, but necessary or essential if it's something that can be done online or not in person. For example, if you say today, you say you're coming in for a business meeting, they may very well say no, because that's something that they think you can do online. If you're a technician for a company coming in to do warranty work on a piece of equipment you sold to a U.S. company, then they would permit that. Right now, there's basically they're kind of morphing together two things. One is you can come in for work purposes. The other is you can come in for you're allowed to come in for essential travel. Okay, technically all work should be considered essential, but it's not. I mean, in practicality, the Customs and Border Protection at the land borders want to see some sort of documentation that your work is essential or work is related to some essential industry. What I have been doing for my clients and what I recommend everybody look at, which I think Sharron's going to distribute after our call, is a memo from, let me make sure I read the name of it correctly, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Now, if you go online and you go to U.S. Customs and Border Protection and there's a question, what is essential travel? It's really vague. It's basically the last slide we gave you. But this memo, we call it the CISA memo, is very detailed and very broad and covers many different industries and and explains how or why they consider them to be part of our essential infrastructure. So I recommend anybody who's looking for business travel or even has someone coming in with a work permit, take a look at this memo to see where you can fit in. That's where we usually start when we have a client call. Okay. The next slide mentions that when we want to reiterate that these current cross-border restrictions are, at least to the U.S., are not restricted by air, only by land. So if you are in in an industry where you think you're going to have a difficult time proving that you're essential, we recommend that you fly, if at all possible, because the question won't even come up. You still have to be inspected for admission. Obviously, you still have to be admissible. You have to be coming in for a legitimate purpose. Whether you're going to Disneyland or you're going to some type of work function, including a meeting. A meeting would be allowed if you went by air. And as I mentioned before, if you're a dual citizen of the U.S. and Canada, like Jamie, you can travel back and forth freely. They can't stop you from entering a country of which you're a citizen. So those are the people in the best situation. Okay, I'll turn it over to Jamie for the Canada border restrictions.
Thanks, Liz. That was great. So, oops, I got to go back one. So the Canadian border restrictions mirror the U.S. border restrictions in that they focus on the essentiality. So the critical infrastructure of Canada's national strategy defines what they mean by that. And they talk about 10 sectors. So they talk about energy and utilities, information and communication technologies, finance, health, food, water, transportation, safety, government, and manufacturing. And all of those different subsectors can be viewed in various different ways to fit pretty much almost anyone's business. So we have had several clients over the last couple of weeks that need to come in to be able to show that they're exempt from the quarantine restrictions. And it's about making that unique and customized strategy and argument for each client to show how their business fits within the essentiality sectors of what Liz was talking about, but then also talking about how it factors into the Canadian regulations as well. So those are a key part of figuring out who from the US can come in your cases, since you guys are already in Canada. It's more the argument of how do you fit within restrictions so that your employees, your subcontractors, how do they go into the United States, meet that essentiality requirement, and then come back into Canada and not have to quarantine for 14 days, since that would be a major job interruption for anyone to do that every time they crossed over to the US. So the Quarantine Act went into effect in March. It's been a law that's been available to Canada for a really long time, but they enacted those regulations and those restrictions back in March. So what it says is anyone crossing into Canada who can meet the restrictions, the border restrictions, must quarantine themselves for 14 days upon arrival into Canada. That quarantine is being taken very seriously by the Canadian border. They are calling a public health officer who are designated as quarantine officers during this time. They are recording your personal information, including your phone number, your email address, your address, and other biographical information. And then they have specific public health officers that are following up on those quarantine restrictions. So they are calling, they're emailing, and they are doing checks, random checks that are at someone's home or place of business to make sure they are following that quarantine restriction. I don't know if any of you saw the article the other day in the paper that talked about the family that resides in Florida, but the wife and the husband is a Canadian citizen, and because the spouse was with them, they fell under the immediate relative exemption. They were allowed in, but they were counseled about quarantine. And 2 days after their admission into Canada, they were found out at a grocery store abandoning the quarantine restrictions, and they have been fined and ticketed at this point. So they are taking it very seriously, and the exemptions from this requirement are very narrow. They're erring on the side of caution to make more people quarantine than not. So it's been a interesting road to navigate these restrictions. Liz and I are working together to be able to build that cross-border case to say they fit within the U.S. essentiality to go in, no quarantine restrictions into the United States. They meet the essentiality requirement coming back, they're exempt from quarantine. So it really is, it's a teeter-totter balancing test between the two of us to be able to make sure that each country's legal argument is sound and that you can meet those restrictions and have a smooth crossing between the two countries. So the quarantine exemptions, as they are laid out, I specifically mentioned these four because there was an internal memo that I was able to obtain within the last couple of weeks where the directors gave guidance to the border service officers. So these are the frontline officers, and then the superintendents, which is the next level inside secondary, about when someone meets the quarantine exemption. They meet that in these four broad categories: either trade and transport, cross-border worker, medical support, and essential service. And I'll tell you that most likely everyone who is on this call is going to fit within trade and transport, cross-border worker, or essential service. And you'll see why medical support is a little bit, it's very narrow. Before I get into those exact requirements, what's been working with us is this letter that we've been able to put together that's specific and individual to each company. So each person's case is unique and requires this thoughtful analysis and interpretation of the law, the border restrictions, the acts, and in Canada we call them orders in council. So the border restrictions are one order in council, and that's what we keep hearing every 30 days. Every 30 days, they give everyone a little bone to say, oh, maybe it'll be up now. Now we're at August 20th, I think, is our next one, right? And then we're going to reevaluate and see if we're going to open the border back. I know from talking to government officials here on the Canadian side that unless a miracle occurs, they are fully prepared to keep the border closed through the end of this calendar year. So if you want a prediction from my, crystal ball here, it would be that we're probably going to remain closed and be dealing with these issues at least through the end of this calendar year. There is no deference being given to those who have land here. There is no deference being given to other people that are outside the immediate family member realm. And a big part of that is because of the quarantine restrictions. If they lift the border restrictions and the quarantine restrictions or orders in council remain in effect, that would mean visitors would have to come to Canada and quarantine before they could, quote, visit Canada. So it doesn't make sense. If someone comes in and they're a visitor, they're here to stay here for hours or a day, not 2 weeks. So be prepared for a long haul with these border restrictions and quarantine restrictions as they are. So these letters that we've been able to create, these we call them support letters in the immigration industry, give the law and fact to an officer in a way that's easy for them to understand and relate back to the handbooks and guidance that is given to them in order to handle a case. So you have to think about the border as something that is very broad in terms of what each officer is responsible for. They process refugees, they process criminality, they process health issues, they process visitors in terms of spousal visitor records and other sort of items. So to just talk about this new quarantine and border restriction, it's all very new to them, and they have not received a lot of guidance on it. They have not received any training on it. And I can tell you specifically from my close relationship with the border that a lot of times I call the border and tell them things that are going on that they didn't even get a memo from because Justin Joe just told us on the news in his most recent press conference. So there's a lot of disconnect there, and they appreciate when a company is prepared and is able to articulate to the officer what they need and how they fit within it. So that's what these letters have really been helpful to do, is use a document to articulate to an officer how you fit within that exemption. And it gives them the opportunity to feel confident in the decision they're making to avoid the Quarantine Act, and gives them something to fall back on to back up their decision making to a superior officer who may question it later on. So it really is a good thing to have. I know Sharron asked me to mention, and I will, in Canada, the States has the same or similar form. It's just a different format. But in Canada, we have what's called a use of representatives form. And this form allows a licensed immigration professional to speak with a border officer on their behalf. So when we put together cases, I always include this use of representative form for each employee that's going over, so that if they do have a problem and they are pulled into secondary, that allows me to call the Board of Entry and have a conversation with an officer regarding that individual, because that representative form is the authority to release that information to that third party. So it gives me the opportunity to loop in the client and the officer to have that conversation to be able to remedy any situation they occur. So trade and transport, they have been wanting to keep that going in terms of truck drivers and commercial traffic. Commercial traffic in general has not stopped at all. There are no restrictions. When you deal with commercial traffic, it's a different sector of the bridge. So for Peace Bridge, I don't know if you guys are all familiar, but when you go over the Peace Bridge, if you veer over to the right, that's commercial. If you go stay to the left, that's the normal immigration processing. Anyone who's in trade or transport, that is something that's uninterrupted. I have been able to use this in transport in other scenarios. For instance, a company that has work to do in the States, that they are building motors and trains and other planes, they're building those transportation vehicles for a U.S. company in order to keep people moving. That has been a more creative argument, say that's within that essentiality and fits within the quarantine restrictions, but it's been successful. Cross-border worker is the most common. It's the most straightforward when someone has an actual work permit. So Liz mentioned some of the US common work permits, especially from Canada. L, H1B, TN, E1, E2, those are all very common work permits. If you do have a work permit that allows you to go to the United States, then you have to make sure that when you're coming back into Canada, you declare yourself as a cross-border worker. That is a key term that you want to use in the immigration process of the interview, right at the booth, because that is the term that they're going to recognize right away. It's like a key buzzword, and they'll say, oh, you're exempt from quarantine, on your way. So I just drill that into my clients that have the work permit to go to Canada. Sometimes they're US citizens and they work on that side, but then they live in Canada, like myself. And, you know, we just, what are you coming back from? I'm coming back from work. Okay, so you work in the States. Yes. All right, go ahead. There was a recent memo that happened in the last couple of weeks that even if you are a cross-border worker, they're going to start taking your email, your phone number, and your address. And they put it into effect, and the next time I crossed after it was in effect, they asked me my phone number. And the next time, they asked me my email. And the next time, they asked me my address. So they keep building the file. If they do that, just answer. You have to be put into a separate system to be quarantined. It doesn't mean you're quarantined. It just helps them build a database of who these cross-border workers are. Medical support is the really narrow category that I was talking about that probably you guys don't fit into, and it talks about this delivery and then these items. So unless someone has a specific question about that, I'll kind of skip by it. Essential service. So while essential service says to provide or receive essential services, including emergency responders, this has been something that is found to be extremely broad. Essential services could be someone in the food packing industry who has like I had a packaging company who had to have someone go in to be able to do some servicing for that. Anything that you could say that falls within that broad memo that Liz has provided, those kind of documents kind of go hand in hand. So we can use them back and forth between Canada and the US to prove this essentiality that is really a discretionary term that's up for interpretation. Immediate relative issues. So this is more of like a personal or family issue, but immediate relatives are not granted an exemption into the US at all at this time in a land border. So Liz had mentioned earlier that there's no restrictions of flying into the United States, but driving into the United States, the exemption that Canada came out with, I think it's about 4 weeks ago now, saying that immediate relatives can come into Canada now to be able to reconnect with their family. That same exemption has not been mirrored by the US as of yet. So we've been getting a lot of questions about that, saying, well, my daughter's in the States and she's having a baby and I need to be there. If you don't fly, you're not getting there by the land border at this time. The only caveat to that is if you are already a US citizen or permanent resident, then you have a right of entry. So those restrictions don't come against you.
You know, Jamie, I just want to add that this also extends to individuals who are have work permits like L1As, L1Bs, and they may want to, what we call flagpole, meaning they're in the US and they want to turn around and come back, just go to the border for the purpose of processing their, well, I can say they can't really do a renewal anymore, but they could, if they wanted to process maybe an E, an E2 is a different type of visa, but there's a process called flagpoling where you enter Canada just for the purpose of turning around to process a work permit. They're still allowing that, but the issue is if you're here with your family they're not letting the families, renew their status or get their status. They say no. So they end up stuck in Canada and having to fly back. I have heard one or two stories where they did allow that, but I can't find any authority for it. And I was just on an annual conference today where Customs and Border Protection said, no, we're not, the family members are not essential unless, in some rare case, you can really make a case for anything, but the rule is no. So if you do take your family over to Canada and you want to come back and you have your car, you're just probably going to be driving back alone if you're the worker, and they're going to be flying home.
Yeah, for sure. And great adding in there, because these kind of issues are these little caveats of things that you don't really know unless you're in the circle of the lawyers that we communicate with all the time. So we're all trying to tell each other what's happening and how things are going, because you wouldn't really think that if the main person, the main applicant is going, well, why couldn't the derivatives go with them? So that's an important thing to know. But all of these restrictions going to the United States can all be circumvented as long as you fly. None of these restrictions apply at the airport. Okay, so the immediate relative exemption that Canada just came out with is very specific. It's only for a spouse or a common law partner. Common law partners are really difficult to define and also to prove. So that would be something that if it was a common law partner, I would say consult someone to be able to get the proper evidence to show an officer on. A dependent child, a dependent child is if they're a dependent on your tax returns and they fit the age, that would be something that would be a dependent child. Sometimes it can be a stepchild that can work as well. The parent or the step parent, and a guardian or tutor. Now, I tried this guardian or tutor for a elderly person and have been shut down by that, just so you know. Guardian, there's a subsection in the guidance that only officers have received that I wasn't aware of until I went forward to the border to make this argument that there was an elderly woman who was being taken care of by a granddaughter, and she had the power of attorney over her, was a guardian for her, she couldn't take care of herself, and that was not enough. So that is specific to the guardian being a child. The one that has been used that way to get in is a family that was in Canada in status, U.S. citizen, in Canada in status, went to adopt a child in the United States and brought the child back with them to Canada. So the derivative status that Liz was just talking about for spouses and for children, Canada is allowing those derivative status in and getting visitor records for those who would not necessarily have that status. So that restriction isn't mirrored on the other side of the border and can also be shown as the guardian, dependent child, spouse under this exemption as well. I think this is you, Liz.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just wanted to mention about the relatives. I mean, obviously, Canada has a kinder and gentler rule. I mean, in the U.S., it's unbelievably strict. I mean, I had a woman who fell and broke her back, and her daughter needed to come in to the U.S. Nope, didn't. I had a man with a wife and their newborn baby in Canada. Nope. They can't come in unless they fly, and they're like, but we're 1 minute from the border. It doesn't matter. Just get on the plane, but people don't want to fly. So it's kind of a mess for some people. But like our job right now, and Jamie's too, is basically kind of put together like a mishmash solution. Where you might have children flying, the worker parent driving, somebody, and it's clients hate it, but it's really the only solution. I mean, we want to problem solve, and we're trying to negotiate all these different rules. And speaking of rules, okay, other entry considerations have to do with President Trump's series of proclamations, which are, essentially travel bans. They are relevant to Canadians or people in Canada just because even though there is no official travel ban from Canada, if you have traveled to any of these countries or regions within the last 14 days, you can't enter the US. So say if you're in France and then you fly to Canada, you're not going to be allowed in the US until 14 days have gone by. So that's why there aren't people flying directly from Europe to the US. I'm sure Canada has its own restrictions as well. But what everyone is trying to do now is to find some place their people can go for 2 weeks before they try to come into the US. I can't even tell you some of the bizarre places I've been hearing people have decided to land for a couple of weeks, but just new and interesting vacations. There are, obviously there are a number of exemptions, which, this is completely separate from the cross-border restrictions, but because yes, you can bring in your spouse, your minor children, your siblings, if you're a US citizen or permanent resident. And there's also a strange exemption for professional athletes and their immediate families because, sports are essential. So, if you're playing in the PGA, you can come in with, your wife, your kids, and all your trainers and equipment holders.
Okay. I think we have a question. Do we want to address it?
Yeah, it looks like it's for you, Jamie.
Okay. So we have Canadian technicians, some with L1B, some without. They have no issues crossing in and out using the essential worker letter per specific points from the Ontario Essential Workplace website and letter from US customers stating their company has been deemed essential in the state and county and have hired Packline to perform work at their facility. Recently, one of our workers flew from Texas to Toronto on July 10th, spent the weekend at home in Canada, and then drove to Michigan on July 13th. He received a call from a Canadian officer as a random quarantine check and was told he required an exemption card letter. Ooh, card number. Okay, Ernest, quick question. So there is a mysterious letter that some people have been able to get from the health minister, Tam, and I don't know how to get it. I have a colleague in Toronto who has connections all over the place. She's been working on it. She's been sending people and different contacts that she has to try and get a hold of one of these letters. I know it is real because I have a connection at the Peace Bridge. He's like the immigration liaison, and he told me he's seen one. I don't know how to get it. I'm waiting to get more information, but really you don't need it. So what probably happened was this individual who came back, so they flew from Texas.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so basically, so what we do is we have a standard border package that we give the guys showing that we've shipped equipment, etc. With COVID and the travel ban, then we've been providing a letter, and we get one from our customer in the States. So they carry all that with them. The border guards look at it, but even though they have that paperwork and they don't stop us, they did take his information on July 10th. He's been in Michigan for almost 2 weeks, and he received a call just this past Wednesday as a random checkup and was told, well, you're not quarantined, but you're back in the States. This could cause an issue, so you should really get this exemption. They provided an email address, but looking at that website that contains that Government of Canada email address, it talks about US. It sounds like it's when you travel into Canada to perform work as if you're coming from the States, that you then are supposed to provide your dates of travel, why you can't quarantine, etc. But it doesn't talk about Canadians returning home after they've been working in the States. We're not going to Europe. We're not going anywhere else. We're only going between Canada and the States.
That's the letter that I'm talking about, Ernst. So okay. That's what I was referring to. So that's the letters that we've been providing that have those buzzwords and the information and the law in there. You have everything you need to prove the essentiality going into the US with
Yes.
the work permit, and you have everything to prove that they're coming back to Canada and avoiding the border restrictions. But what you don't have is the information to prove that they're avoiding the quarantine restrictions. That's what you're missing. So you're right. That exemption card number is probably for a US company coming into Canada. But your argument is unique. And it's unique to this group that's talking right now because you guys live in Canada. You're going to the US for you're a cross-border employee. That's the whole cross-border employee. So if I can tell you anything that's useful today, you tell all your guys who have L1Bs to say when they're coming back, they're cross-border employees. That should be the ding in the officer's head to say exempt from quarantine. Now, if this is happening and this person's getting a call, there's two other problems here. One, once they left the Canada and went back to the United States, that is an allowable break in quarantine. So there is a memo and there is guidance on that for them to say that if you're quarantined within Canada and you leave and go straight back to the United States or straight to the United States from your quarantined area, you have not broken quarantine. Okay? So that's part of the orders in council. The other part of it is if this.
Oh, you just muted yourself. Jamie?
You're
You
muted.
just muted. There you go. No, Jamie, you've muted.
It said the host muted me. Am I back? Somebody
You're
else
back
muted
now.
me. I didn't mute myself. Okay. Okay. I guess it was an accident. I'm like, no, I didn't do it. I can't undo it. So it looks like somebody may have not understood the situation that your worker was in at the time. And it sounds like they did enter their information through a quarantine officer into the quarantine system.
Yes.
Now, that can be undone at the border level. So if it is the airport or the border, a border officer, a BSO, can undo that quarantine restriction, and they can do it online or in secondary. Okay, so this worker that has this issue, on his way back into Canada, he should say cross-border worker, cross-border worker, cross-border worker, and then he should also say, can you please make sure that it's noted in there, because I did get a call from public health checking up on me, and as I understand it, I did not break quarantine by leaving and going into the US, and I'm exempt from quarantine as I am a cross-border worker.
Okay, now we do have a contractor who's Canadian and Lizabeth, you can plug your ears for this. We have a contractor who does not have an L1B visa, but he has crisscrossed here and there. But if we use the term cross-border worker, he does not have.
It's not going to work. Yeah, because he's not. He doesn't have status to work in the United States, so he can't declare himself as that without having status.
Yeah, because he is supervising contractors who are American to make sure that our equipment is installed in a manner that maintains the warranty requirements, which we also have learned over the years is key.
He needs a work permit.
Yeah, you have a US company?
We do.
Yeah, he needs a work permit.
For sure. You're just opening him up to a really big potential problem where if he does get caught one of these times going back and forth, he could be barred entry. And then it's going to be, that's going to affect him both personally and professionally. So it's really important for that one to get resolved because he's putting himself at risk at this point.
Yeah, they've been ramping up expedited removal, which they hadn't been doing for years, which is basically they deport you right from the border if they feel like you've done something, you engaged in some sort of unpermitted activity in the US, or you made some kind of misrepresentation, a material misrepresentation. So, yeah.
Okay.
So Liz, do you want to talk about the quarantine restrictions by Governor Cuomo? Oh, you know what? Ohio's on that list now.
Yeah, they've got 31 states on there now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just something to mention if you do have workers in the U.S. who are, traveling from state to state, from customer to customer. There are these now U.S. quarantine restrictions that have been instituted by, the one you hear about most in the news are the governors of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, which are basically requiring any travelers coming from certain states. There's a list of 31 states now, and they're coming to stay in New York State or New Jersey or Connecticut. They have to quarantine for 2 weeks immediately upon entry. There are obviously, exceptions. Like obviously, if you're just driving across the country and you just pass through states and use the restroom, or even spend a night, it's the guidelines say less than 24 hours. But there are other restrictions too there were so many of them that I couldn't fit them on a slide. I mean, I know the city of Chicago has requirements. So, I just recommend, like, if you're having people who are going to be staying at multiple places for one business trip, especially if it's, cross state lines, have them, check, the travel requirements for that, region or city or state, because it's changing every day.
There we go.
And it's over.
Does anyone have any other questions? I mean, I always say in these presentations, free consultation time, people. Cost money after today.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so my first question is, I will currently, and a couple of my staff will currently go to Buffalo every 6 months or so to have business meetings, to talk about our logistics stuff. We have a warehouse in Buffalo that is run by US staff and ships to customers, and we just go there for business meetings to discuss things and to make sure the warehouse is working properly. So it sounds like because we drive across the border and currently business meetings are not really considered worthy to do in person, that we should not do that for the foreseeable future. Would you concur with that?
When you say you have a US warehouse, do you have a US company?
No, we're only a Canadian company.
Just a warehouse. I guess it depends on, if you call it a business meeting, or if you're going to be actually inspecting inventory or equipment or anything like that that requires you to be on site, then you may be able to do it. It's just, it depends on what your activities are going to be.
So we would actually physically look at the inventory. So we are physically looking at stuff. No, we're not doing work, but we are inspecting the goods that are there. So that's difficult to do by Zoom and teleconference,
Right.
but it's not, I don't know if it's considered worthy of a work visa, and I wouldn't want to go that route anyway. It's really just to meet with them and to inspect product and that sort of thing. And I guess I'm wondering, is that level of meeting worthy in the eyes of US border officials, or is it considered not worthy enough?
Where are the products manufactured?
China.
Okay. I mean, there's like a fine line there. I would say, the fact that you have a warehouse where your equipment goes, en route to US customers. I'm talking about two different things here: admissibility as a business visitor, and then essentiality. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those situations where it should be perfectly permissible for you to go in and look at your product that's about to be distributed. I mean, assume all sales go to Canada, or all sale revenue goes to the Canadian company.
Yes,
right?
correct.
How are your US employees paid?
So we have no US employees. We subcontract with a US company who invoices us for their services.
Okay. So you're basically meeting with your US distributor, so to speak.
Yeah, you could say that.
You're meeting with them and you're inspecting your product before it's, officially, distributed.
Right.
I would say, first of all, okay, I think that's permissible business visitor activity. I think just how you present it to the border could make a difference. I mean, I've been hearing, and it also depends on what port you're going to, because I've been hearing, say in Michigan, if you're coming in for just a meeting, no, they won't let you in. You might go somewhere like the Peace Bridge and they might say it's okay. But I think
should go through Fort Erie.
Fort Erie, okay, yay, it's 5 minutes from my office. I would say, I think if you, prepared a letter and prepared, is it just you, or you're talking about multiple people?
Usually it's 2 or 3 people that will go.
Okay. I guess I would like, prepare yourself by, this is just completely unofficial advice, but I would just, be able to explain why you need to be on site, why this can't be done, in a meeting, and the fact that you're only coming in like a couple times a year. I mean, that's also helpful. You're basically, like facilitating the, the sale of your product in the US, but you've got to look at it in person, to, ensure quality control or that sort of thing. I think that could work. If you run into problems, then your only other option would be to fly.
Yeah, which would be kind of a pain.
Yes.
Okay.
And then keep in mind that if you do go over for those business meetings, Canada is probably not going to view that as something that was either essential or cross-border worker. So you would have to be ready and willing to quarantine for the 2 weeks coming back from that business meeting.
Very useful. Because when I crossed in the past, they usually stamp my passport with B1 visitor.
That's right.
For purposes of these meetings. And then you're saying that when I go back, it'd be 2-week quarantine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it might interrupt your flow of business if you do that. You might want to weigh
totally will.
So we have a question.
Maybe if you don't call it a meeting, because I know like some cross business visitor technicians have been able to avoid the quarantine, right, Jamie? If you're coming.
Yes. Well, but if they're a technician, then it's, you mean like an after sales and service list?
Right.
Yeah. But you and I know that in their view, an after sales and service is more like a work permit, which then is more in the argument of the cross-border worker than just a business visitor for meetings. So it's all just weighing those factors.
Right. You're all B1s, but you're doing different things. So.
Right. So we did have a question from Vernon. Is the application for a visa something you just fill out, or is it advisable to get assistance? And I did answer while we were going back and forth there to say and to explain that whenever someone comes to us, Liz or myself, and they think that they may have a really good handle on what work permit or what situation, what sort of vehicle is best for them, they're always very interested and surprised to find that there was more than one answer for that type of situation. So someone may be eligible for an H-1B, an L-1, a TN. You could be eligible for everything, but which one's going to work best for you? What are your job duties? What is your education? What is your experience? How long do you want to be in the U.S.? Do you want a route to get there permanently? Is this something you just want temporarily? There's so many things to factor into the decision of which work permit works best for you, that it really does behoove you to contact a expert in this area to be able to go through that analysis for you, figure out what your options are, providing you with those options, and then it's up to you of which one you want to execute on. And because things are very complicated right now, hiring a lawyer who is specialized in these areas, and Liz is extremely specialized in immigration. That is what she focuses on. Same with myself. So we don't, while she was a litigator in the past, that's not, I don't think you really do that anymore, right, Liz? You're
No.
Immigration solely focused. So you want someone who has their beat on what immigration is every day, so that you can get someone who has the up-to-date information and strategies to put you in a good situation short-term and long-term. If you find someone who kind of was one of those jack-of-all-trades lawyers, I find so many clients that come to us afterwards with that, and then someone tried to give them the easy way out, but then that didn't really help them for their long-term strategy. So not trying to sell you on anything, but I think if it was me in your situation, it's a worthwhile investment to get the advice of an expert in this area, so that you know you're doing the right thing, you're heading in the right direction, and you understand all of your options, not just pigeonholing yourself into one.
Yeah, I would like to add that, if you, especially since you're talking about cross-border immigration, I would recommend getting someone who has a lot of experience in cross-border work, because, I have people who call attorneys in New York and California, and they don't practice on the border. They don't really know what's going on. I mean, they know immigration law and they may practice immigration law full time, but then when they're looking at, they don't understand what the reality is of crossing the border. They don't even understand in many cases that you can process cases right at the border. They're filing them through U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the mail, which costs a lot more money, and you have a much lower likelihood of approval. So I hear that all the time from people like, oh, I didn't even know I had that option. I've got an immigration attorney. And to reiterate what Jamie said, you can't dabble in immigration. It's like, you just can't. You need someone who practices it like day in, day out, because like, as we said, the law, the policies, the practices change constantly, like hour to hour sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Especially recently.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the same situation as Stephen Ertz with my technicians crossing the border constantly. We've never had work visas because we're A, an essential service, and B, specialists, and we hire and have U.S. people employed by our company. So we've always been able to get across with letters from our company and letters from our customer. But it sounds to me like things are getting tougher. So Jamie and Liz, we will be in touch. But if we started to try to get our L visas tomorrow, what is the lead time?
Do you have a U.S. company?
We do not have a registered U.S. company. We have partners.
Yeah, I mean, I would think Jamie would agree. I mean, we'd have to analyze your whole business setup and exactly what type of work you're going to be doing in the U.S. Because for an L, for example, you need a U.S. entity. It's possible you could qualify for a NAFTA classification. My favorite visa is the E1 visa. I do them constantly. It's the perfect visa if you only have a Canadian company and you're doing business in the U.S. that goes beyond what a business visitor can do. Right now, the consulates are closed. Well, they're not closed, but they've suspended visa processing. So a time frame for an E, we just can't tell you right now. I would say it's going to be a while. An L you can process right at the border and get it approved immediately, but there are certain requirements, like you need a U.S. company and you need certain U.S. operations. So again, I could go on forever, but it would probably be best like if we heard what your entire scenario was.
Yeah, that was a really good example of what I meant by my analysis, right? Like, Liz, you look at Glenn's company and there might be someone that you say, well, you know what, this guy would be a great TN. This person would be the perfect E1. This person could be an L because Glenn may want to retire in Florida. Who knows? You know what I mean? It might be worth something that you do a bunch of different things even within the same company, depending upon what everybody's job duty is, education is, and what the overall structure of the company is.
And there are actually multiple places to adjudicate these cases too. That's the other thing to think about. E-visas are adjudicated by the State Department. The TNs and L1s can be adjudicated right at the border, but they can also be adjudicated by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So,
right.
Yeah.
I know we'll qualify because we've been through it before, but we just let everything lapse because we were having absolutely no problem with our people crossing the border twice a week even. But my controller, Ann, is in the back here. She's listening. She will be in touch. I assume we're going to get this PowerPoint presentation and in addition to your contact information.
Yes, you will.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you. Then we'll take it from there and not waste anybody else's time.
I don't think we have any more questions.
I do. I have another question.
Okay.
So obviously there's a U.S. election happening this fall. Do you see any difference in whether the border is more open or closed, regardless if it's Democrats or Republicans that win the election?
Well, yes. Right. I mean, with Stephen Miller in the White House, I have to say, I mean, it's rather horrifying what's going on, but right, just to give you an idea, as of August 1st, the Trump administration is laying off 70% of its U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services workers. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, okay, which is completely stupid because, all those application fees, they've basically taken all the money that's come in and given it to ICE so they can run around, arresting people and kicking them out of the country instead of, processing, legal immigration. So that's the problem. I mean, it's they're putting a halt to legal immigration in their quest to stop illegal immigration. But I mean, I guess among, my colleagues, everyone feels that, if we get a new president and the current president willingly actually leaves the White House, then we'll be able to, that things are going to change, because there are a lot of things, the law is in place. It's just there are a lot of, executive orders that President Trump has put into place that have just temporarily suspended what is supposed to be going on. Okay, so like if all those are lifted when he leaves, all that alone might be enough to get things back to normal.
I guess
COVID aside, of course, yeah.
With this is like, for example, I guess stereotypically, Democrats are more receptive to immigration and more concerned about public health. And correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption.
No, that's right. Over the course of the U.S. history, in terms of what it looks like when a Democrat is a president and when a Republican is a president, the immigration laws tend to be a little bit more reasonable under a Democrat than a Republican in general.
So if, let's say hypothetically, Biden becomes the president and the border becomes more open to immigration, would that be counteracted by the Democrats being more concerned about public health and therefore wanting to keep the border closed to avoid virus transmission?
I don't think that that's something that is actually in the thoughts of anybody right now, because if the Democrats try to create vehicles for legal immigration and then they follow the constructed laws of how immigration works in its legal framework. So the only reason we're having issues right now on the US side with all of these complications and making it harder for people to get work permits is what Liz just said. It's the executive orders that are crushing us, not the law. So if these executive orders, they would be relatively simple to roll back because they're relatively simple to enact. Then if that was the case, we kind of go back to what we already had, the framework that we had that was working before, to facilitate those people who should be here, who, help the economy and move everything forward. But in terms of the border closure right now is driven by Canada, not the US. So Canada is driving this land border closure, and they're the ones in the driver's seat, not the United States. If it was up to the United States, the border would already be open. Okay.
The other thing, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's just that's why all these government officials from the U.S. are contacting the prime minister and everyone that's involved in these decisions to say, well, can you make an exception? Can you open to this? Can you do this? Because the U.S. side would just mirror it back and forth. And the only reason they're remaining closed is because Canada refuses to reopen.
And I was going to say is it's also pretty well understood that a lot of these presidential proclamations and travel bans are not driven by COVID. COVID is basically being used as a pretext to ban immigrants and non-immigrants from coming to the U.S. So if you're saying that Democrats are concerned about both public health and they're more favorable toward legal immigration, I think that if it is determined that a certain proclamation really is not justified for public health reasons, they'll certainly remove it.
Okay, really useful. And then I guess my last question is regarding trade shows. So myself and my staff historically have gone to the USA quite often for trade shows. And obviously, we've been canceling, or the show itself has been canceled quite a bit. Again, always going under as B1 visitors for trade shows. We make sure never to sell while staying on U.S. soil. We're just soliciting orders. The sales are consummated, closed in Canada. So we make sure we make sure we don't have tax nexus in the USA. But I guess my question is, if air travel is okay for business visitors, does that mean, subject to quarantining for 14 days once you come back into Canada, that if we were comfortable going to the U.S. trade show, it's okay to go now?
Yeah, yeah. If you're flying, yeah, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's
that's
a
what I
business
put.
visit. It's a permissible activity for a business visitor to attend a trade show. So,
Okay, great. That's all I needed on that one.
I have a personal question, if I could ask. This is not business related. This is personal related. And now that we've got you, I'm just going to take the opportunity to ask you this question. It might apply to other people too. I have a son that lives in the U.S. He is a dual citizen. He is married to an American citizen. Of course, we haven't seen them since March. They would love to come up. The concern is the 14-day quarantine. But if I heard you right today, they could come up and go back to the U.S., like they could come up for 5 days and go back to the U.S., and that would not be breaking quarantine. Is that correct?
Okay, so your son's a Canadian and your daughter-in-law's US.
Yes.
Okay, so your daughter-in-law cannot come without your son.
Right.
Yes, okay, just so you know, because I've had that question,
Okay.
that the daughter-in-law wants to come, but the son stays in the States, and I'm like, no. So if the son and daughter-in-law come together, they would come in and they would have to have a quarantine plan.
Yeah.
So they have to demonstrate that they're coming into a place where they can stay for the 14 days. And it has to be with someone who is not vulnerable. Vulnerable is someone who is with a pre-existing medical condition,
Yeah.
or 65 years of age or older.
Okay.
So if they have that plan in place and they can show that, they should be able, I wouldn't have them volunteer that they're only going to be there for 5 days.
But
Okay.
they can go back.
Right. But as long as they stayed in quarantine for the 5 days, so they would have to adhere to the quarantine restrictions for that 5 days. And then when they would need to go straight, either drive right back over the border or fly right back home. But by leaving Canada, it does not legally break that quarantine in terms of breaking the law, but it breaks the quarantine in terms of they're now no longer under the quarantine restriction.
Okay. Oh, that's so great. Thank you. That's good.
You're welcome.
Amy, who did you say would qualify, or someone who is vulnerable?
65 age or younger is not vulnerable. At 65 and older is vulnerable, and someone with pre-existing medical conditions is
What
vulnerable.
about like newborns or things like that?
No, they haven't gone that far yet. They're usually going up, not down.
What about someone who's pregnant?
Nope.
Well, that's interesting, because I don't know if you saw that article in the newspaper about that guy who was having a huge commotion because he couldn't go to see his pregnant wife in Canada because he couldn't quarantine for 2 weeks.
With her?
Yeah.
That might have been an individual officer issue where so this is what I see when they do the border. Officers give their personal opinion, and this is why it's so scary to do things on your own without lawyers. They give their personal opinion of what they think you should do. So I have a client who's married to a US citizen. She's Canadian. All her kids are Canadian. She wanted to come back here to stay with her dad. She had a quarantine plan. Her husband's in the military, so he's been deployed. She came here and got to the Peace Bridge port of entry and said, I have a quarantine plan. I'm staying with my brother. He's 42. I have all my supplies. And they said, well, we think you should stay at an Airbnb. Why? What does that have to do with anything? And really gave her a hard time. So it turned out that I gave a phone call. I said, I don't understand. Is Airbnb in some sort of guidance that I haven't seen in terms of what your quarantine plan needs to be? And of course, the superintendent was mortified, embarrassed that, an officer would give that type of opinion of what he thought was best. It did happen with a pregnant girl who came over too, that the officer said, I would prefer that you not come in because you're pregnant and that could cause a risk to you. She was like 5 weeks pregnant. And it's, well, your opinion doesn't matter. So it is something that we are seeing in terms of officers' discretionary opinion, but not something that's in the actual definition of vulnerable person.
Yeah, they're always giving legal advice. So when you're saying like, should I get a lawyer or not get a lawyer? The last thing you should do, is listen to the person at the border who says, you should get a green card. You just go down to the USCIS office, or, you should get an L1B, or you should get, whatever. And then I get a phone call. Hi, I want to get an O1 visa based on my extraordinary ability. It's like some golf caddy or something. And so if you listen to them, like, and at the same time though, I find that like if they're having entry issues and then they do go back in after I have gotten them some kind of work permit, they'll say, oh yeah, you guys told me to get a work permit. They love it. They love hearing that you took their advice. So it could work both ways.
It's so true. I mean, we could sit here and have like a fireside chat of stories of things that have happened at the border. It's great at cocktail parties, but I know we all want to move on with our day.
So great. Sharron, are you still with us?
No.
I am.
Oh, there you
I came on. Yeah, I drove home.
Good.
So I had you in my phone, and then I connected. Nancy let me in, so I came on.
Okay. So if you would, I mean, I think great questions have been asked. And just Jamie and Liz, from my perspective, I know there are many members that will get so much value out of this that couldn't join us tonight. So we have, and I know Nancy had this conversation with you about, this has been recorded and it goes onto the back end of our website that our members have access to. So they can go in and then listen and watch. And I suspect you will be getting some calls from our members, but I mean, from an Innovators Alliance perspective, I can't thank you enough. This has been incredibly valuable. I mean, such clarity. I think everybody's taken something away that's going to benefit them greatly as we continue to move through this for who knows how long. So I just, from Innovators Alliance, wanted to say thank you, and to thank you, Sharron, for organizing it.
I thank these two ladies because they really helped me with my business. Wouldn't be able to do the number of trips that we've done. So
yeah,
I'm glad it all worked out.
Thanks for having us, you guys. This was fun.
It was great. We'd love to have you back another time. Like, who knows where this is going to go, right?
Right.
Oh, there's always something Liz and I can talk about, right, Liz? Another topic for another day.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, that's it.
All right.
No other questions?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Melanie.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
Thanks,
Ciao.
everybody.
Ciao. Bye.
And we'll be in touch.